Okay.
Will you see the hail? You have hail. Hail is real today.
What about when I feel I turned 18? I do that.
Good evening, everybody. We'll get started. I'll just maybe there's fine. I think good evening, everybody. We'll get started a little after the time. They're mandatory. So, welcome. Hope everyone's doing well. We have a couple of housekeeping items. So you have a packet in front of you. I think the last staple packet should kind of be the slideshow. Meeting expectations and housekeeping items haven't changed. Cammie is here to go over the W-9, or will we? So we'll cover that before we move on. Any comments, additions to the agenda? We didn't get the emails. Daniel, did you get emails? Looks like we do need to move another meeting from in December to December 12th. And it looks like there was like a head count, general head count, those of us who can make that meeting. Everyone just raise your hand if you think you can make the. Is that a Wednesday? Tuesday. Problematic. And one of our planning committee.
We'll let folks check first their schedules for a second. So it has moved to the 12th because there is a board meeting in here on the 13th. And you should have already a calendar invite for that date. And it was also in the packet from last week, but just because we were getting some notifications that folks can't make it, we did want for the group to kind of discuss if it's worth pushing it to a date that more people can make, recognizing that the trade-off is, you know, that the schedule is pushing and that other people might not make that date. So
sure. Are there people in the room tonight that know they cannot make it? They have commitments on
Good.
I have a water district meeting that night.
So it sounds like we will still have critical mass, right?
I would think so, yeah. If the group would agree to like move it to the next Wednesday, and maybe we could more people. We know if that's available.
So the next Wednesday would be the 20th, and we would have to just discuss with LTD staff if they can staff this, and so we would just have to get back to the group on whether that's a possibility.
It was getting very close to the holidays. I'm trying to avoid that and try to get this wrapped up before the New Year's.
But we at least see if folks can make the 20th.
Yeah. Let's get there.
We can?
We can.
Oh, we can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sharing. Yeah. So we should probably stick with 12.
Thank you.
Thank you.
would it be impossible to like, instead of pushing it farther away, like kind of condense them a little bit, or do y'all need like 2 weeks before turnaround kind of thing?
Does really help to have time in between to do the work, yeah.
And I guess I should announce that once again, you moved this meeting to a time when I have a conflict at 7 o'clock, so I'll be leaving early.
Me too.
Okay. Thank you.
We do have forms in the packet. One has your vendor form and one has a W-9. And we've been told, Cammy, I don't know if you need to elaborate on this, but in order for us to be able to compensate you properly for the attendance, we just do need those forms filled out. And so if folks can aim to either get those filled out by the end of today's meeting, or make sure that at least by the end of next meeting they're filled out, just so that we can make sure that you're getting compensated on a timely fashion after the end of all of the meetings. So that would be great. Yeah.
Can we choose to waive compensation? Just do you need anything from us on that? Or
It looks like.
email that other name.
Yeah, people you put on their mic.
Yeah, make sure you turn on your mic so that people can hear.
So Josh, if you want to take us off, I think we've gone through all the housekeeping items.
Yeah. Great, so we're really going to try to dig into some of the meat of the issues here today and get at using the core values that we came up with, and some of the core values we came up with last meeting, try to get at the issue of who are the stakeholders and how do we want LTD to talk to them. So that's kind of the core of what this group is about. I wanted to just start with a reminder of what the group is about, because I feel like last meeting there was a little bit of just kind of need for that. So just as a reminder, the goal of this group is to develop this community outreach framework, which will be the way that guide the way that LTD engages and works with the community over the next, hopefully, several years. And this, in order to do that, we need to understand the values that the community wants LTD to uphold, the stakeholders, their needs and preferences around communication engagement, and then the strategies and tactics. And so we're really going to get into those last two bullets today as we start this process, and hopefully make some good progress on it. So this is what the way that we've structured the community outreach framework. The way we're thinking about it is that we would start with the purpose and use of the framework, which I just discussed, the guiding principles and values, and then discussion of who the stakeholders are, and then the strategies and tactics that we would use to engage those stakeholders. Okay. All right. So I'll turn to Emma. I'm going to go over the survey results.
So you may have seen this, but LTD did deploy a community engagement survey. It was out for about 6 weeks, and we worked with LTD to make sure it was deployed in a variety of ways. So we offered it in both print and hard copies, and also had the survey accessible through digital means. So we had our transit ambassadors ride the system and offer people to either take a hard copy of the survey. There are also targeted mailers that were sent out with QR codes that people could access. The customer service station offered hard copies in English and Spanish. And then the digital survey was available and promoted through a variety of ways. So social media, we work with some community partners to have them distribute it through their channels. You may have seen some station or onboarding signage that asks people to take the survey. We also used a pretty, I think, exciting way of actually using the push app notifications, the email app, to get people to take the survey. And we offered a raffle to incentivize those to complete it. So we were able to get 913 surveys that were completed in English and then 43 surveys completed in Spanish. And so today we're just going to walk through a very high level summary of those survey responses to just kind of, I guess, anchor the conversation as we get into talking more about strategies and tactics to keep some of these findings in mind. So these are the high level demographics of the survey. I think if there are questions about kind of digging in more and doing some cross tabulations, we're more than happy to do that. But this is just kind of giving you a really quick snapshot. Average age of survey respondents was 45. They ranged between 13 and 94 years old. We had a primarily a white demographic that responded. I think this group is worth talking about if they want to, if LTD should do some kind of extra focus groups to get information from those that did not respond to the survey. We had 55% female respondents, I think my mic is coming out, 33% male, 6% non-binary, about a quarter of students responded. Close to half had household incomes under 35,000. And then in terms of whether or not folks use LTD, about half ride very often, 20% ride sometimes, and 30% ride rarely or never. So this was the first question about if people have even ever have given feedback or input on any recent LTD projects. What was interesting about this is that over half responded that they had never given feedback, and a quarter of respondents were not sure or did not know. So I think a takeaway here is that LTD maybe not be reaching as many people as it could to gather this critical feedback. A follow-up question was, what has prevented you from engaging more on this? And I think what's really interesting is that this kind of reiterates that 64% were not aware of those projects or initiatives, so there's a real opportunity there. 28% did not know how to give feedback, and then 18% did not think that their feedback would make a difference. So I think that there's a lot of information here for LTD in terms of how to drive more awareness, how to drive more understanding for how to give feedback, but then I think also trying to understand ways to communicate and maybe close the loop on how feedback has been used so that people understand how, and maybe feel more satisfied that their feedback was indeed used. So I'm cutting off.
I can hear you.
Okay. Can folks hear me okay? Great. In terms of ways that LTD can help folks stay up to date. So this is different than engagement, right? Engagement is more of a two-way process. This is more on the inform and educate side. We asked what are the ways that people might prefer staying up to date. And so people responded with social media, receiving quarterly email newsletters, seeing that mobility app push notification, and informal messaging. Those were the most popular. People were able to respond, I think, to their top three. So some of the least popular were attending LTD board meetings, which I think you have to be a big fan to do that. So I think this is, again, critical information that will help LTD staff on how to better get people to know what's going on. This question is regarding, let's see, did I skip? Nope. Okay, so this question is, which activities would folks most prefer if LTD is considering an issue that is important to them? And we can see that people really like short, easy surveys that ask their preferences on outcomes. They also like virtual online meeting formats with the ability to provide feedback and interact with staff. Flyers or mailers that give them the most critical information and provide a contact. That is also something that people like. And also in-person, more open house formats with the ability to kind of take in information on their own time and also speak to staff. Less popular are attending a meeting hosted by a trusted community group or small working groups. Those were less popular. When we asked about how people can actually stay involved, which is a little bit different, right? You want people to both know what's going on, and be able to stay up to date, but then stay involved for the duration of a project, right? Because projects can be long, and so we have to think of ways to get people to stay involved. 55% preferred and said their first choice was receiving frequent and consistent updates on progress and why decisions were made. So I think that there's ways for this group to think about creative strategies that LTD can use to really get at this. 20% said their first choice was having a knowledgeable and responsive LTD staff member who they can contact. And 18% said having more convenient opportunities to provide feedback was what they preferred. And only 6% selected hearing more from other trusted leaders or CEOs as their first choice. And then in terms of trying to make events and activities more convenient to folks, offering more virtual and online engagement opportunities was very popular, as well as hosting meetings and events on weekends. Less popular was making sure that materials are translated or making sure that the information was communicated using minimal text, offering meeting locations close to work. Those were just not as big of a priority as the top two. So I know this is a lot of information, but if folks have any clarifying questions, we totally can answer them, or we can take them back and look at the data and get you guys responses next time.
And also, if people have thoughts just based on what they're hearing about what their takeaways are, that would be great too.
Is there a way to get like kind of cross data analysis, so like show who said what? I feel like that'd be a thing, you know.
Yeah, I think there are ways to cross tab that. I would be interested to know, like, are you just looking for insights maybe for the group, or is there a specific type of group or response that you're looking for?
Yeah, so like let's say the people who wrote frequently all said one thing, and the people who never wrote said another thing. I feel like that'd be good to take into account.
Now remember, this sample is weighted towards people who write well more than the average person to begin with. Yeah.
For sure, that was just
Yeah, I get it.
I think another interesting thing is 43 surveys were completed in Spanish, 913 in English. So if you go to the very last 14% wanted translated materials, I have a feeling that was very different, right? So some of this is pretty steep, you know.
Right. I think Grace.
Courtney.
Sorry, Courtney.
Same question, it was specifically the cross data on the little to never ride.
Yeah.
And then I'm doing some like quick flipping back and forth, but when it's regular updates versus project updates, it's interesting to me because it almost seems like the preference is flipped. Social media is a preference in one case, it's not a preference in another.
Yeah, I think what's maybe, and this could be that it wasn't clear in the survey, the questions were more asking about different stages of engagement. So just getting information, staying up to date on information, and then actually like participating in different activities for getting that information. But again, these are asking to rank to select 3. So you might see one that's higher ranked in one situation. That doesn't mean necessarily it's at odds with like the other example, but we can look into maybe why that may be if that's desired.
This may not be terribly important, but say 33% were interested in hosting meetings and events on weekends. Did you ask them weekdays? Because that could be a minority rather than an important figure.
Yes, I believe there was a question, and we'll have to look at the data about specific time of day, like which time of day.
There was a range of.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so we looked at morning or late morning. I'll have to look back, but there was a question on that, and I can flag that and we can get that.
That's good enough for me. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Anything else you want to talk about? Edward, do you want to move on to, should we move on to stakeholders and partners? This would be a, so at this point, I can facilitate the conversation. This is what we're going to get into who the stakeholders are.
Yeah, unless there's further conversation on the data.
Okay, great. So the way I'm hoping this can work, is this is really intended to be a brainstorming session, and the way we're going to get at it is by first looking at the principles that we talked about last week, right? So now this is not, these are just words, right? This is not an explanation of what we all meant by each of these words or anything like that. But these are the general guiding principles that we heard last time we had this conversation. And I can go through, some of these things. For example, having an honest and transparent discussion is something that I think a lot of communities would prefer over one that is opaque and dishonest, right? So that's clearly something that would be a value that we want to uphold. I think there'd be very little disagreement about that. But then on the other hand, data-driven, that's a term that some people really believe in and believe like we should be making data-driven decisions. And then you might also have a just different perspective where you'd say, well, yes, in some cases we need to have data-driven decision making, but in other cases, we really have to, we're never going to have the perfect amount of data to know what the right decision is, and we might need to make some better decisions based on what we think. So these are all dependent on how you define them when it gets to what you actually mean. But I just wanted to, before we get into the brainstorming, talk about these, and if there are any that you feel like you don't like, or you would want to add to this, or you find confusing or challenging, let's do that before we get into the larger brainstorming session. Yes.
Once again, I had to leave early last time. The one I would suggest adding is involve those who oppose or are likely to be negatively impacted. In the past, that hasn't necessarily been something that LPD's been good at. It's a difficult thing to do, but it's better to have, and forgive my analogy, but LBJ once said it's better to have someone inside the tent urinating out than outside the tent urinating in. And if you can get their input early, you can know what those problems are likely to do.
Yes, LBJ was known for his classy analogy. So what you're getting at is inclusive and diverse participation, but a specific element of that.
Make an effort to involve people, yes.
Right. Right. So making sure that when you're talking about being inclusive, it's not just being inclusive on a demographic sense, it's being inclusive on a perspective sense to make sure you get all the.
So for example, with Transit Tomorrow, you might take an extra effort to check with those people whose routes are likely to be removed.
Thank you. Yes, Gordon.
Can I ask what we say grassroots, what that means in the context of all the other boxes, or what does that mean from the perspective of this initiative?
I think so. That's a big question to pose to the group, because these were directly taken from the breakout group sessions that we had. And so if any folks kind of can recall the conversation that they had in a group in the breakout group setting, like what was intended by grassroots, now is a good time to help Courtney think through that. Does anyone recall?
I'll take a stab at it when in dealing with, in interfacing with grassroots per se. Usually it's recognizing informal groups who are not necessarily organized under a 501c3 or a specific organization or a specific nonprofit, but more like an informal group that has come together with a set of opinions or concerns who don't have a formal infrastructure.
So we mean engaging with grassroots organizations not using grassroots organizing by LTD, or?
That's how I took it when I heard it discussed, but.
That was my understanding as well, based on the conversation last week, but it's something that's a different perspective.
Are we done with grassroots? Because
Yeah.
going to a different topic.
Yeah.
So I guess, I'd like to see something. Obviously, not everybody in the community feels this way, but I feel like the people participating in LTD or representing LTD, I think it's important to demonstrate a commitment to an improving and equitable public transit system. And, you know, I know some of the opposition to past activities have come from people who don't care about that at all, but I still think that that is an important thing for all of us to be committed to.
Can you say a little more about what you mean by an equitable transit system?
Equitable is hard. I mean,
Yeah, I know, that's why, yeah.
It's like more service everywhere. But, you know, I don't know, you know, I sometimes get on and off the bus at some pretty sad bus stops, for example. And, you know, I'd like to think that those aren't distributed through our community based on demographics somehow. I don't know if they are, but I think, you know, we should at least be like, if we're gonna improve them, maybe we start improving them in poorer neighborhoods. I'd like to see them all improved, but you know, if we have to prioritize, maybe we start in poorer neighborhoods. I think we need to, yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, make sure we're not forgetting, segments of the community who are dealing with other aspects of oppression.
So when you're saying equitable improvement, and you can tell me if this is wrong, but it sounds like you're kind of getting at the issue of helping those who need it most as your top priority. And
yes. Yes, but I mean, yeah, I mean, I don't know, and you know, we could argue about whether it's more important to have a better system or to have a more equitable system, but I mean, I think ultimately we want both.
Well, then those may not be mutually exclusive.
Right. I mean, I would argue that, you know, the bus already disproportionately helps those less advantaged. So everything we do to make the bus better is equitable. Some people would like, I'm sure some people would argue that it needs to be more explicit than that.
Other thoughts on values? Principles?
So I just want to, I'm going to look back to the grassroots thing only because what I want to ask about is whether or not what we're talking about is acknowledging engagement with formal and informal community organizations. So as to not say that we're prioritizing one over the other, but we're acknowledging that we're asking LTD to look at community engagement across the spectrum.
So having the responsibility for engagement is being on LTD or rather than on the community focus. Kind of agree with that, right? Like this LTD has to take responsibility for reaching people, not the other way around. Yeah.
From my understanding in grassroots, it means more bottom up, like more like naturally coming from the community. That's kind of hard for LPD, an institution that's part of the community, but like kind of a like official and government backed like part of the community. So it's a little hard for them to do grassroots. So it would probably have to be like them trying to get the community to do grassroots, if that makes sense from my understanding. Hopefully that helps.
No.
Yeah, it's not a question.
Okay.
I think it's my thought on principal approach for it is to be a little bit broader in what we're saying we're directing LTD to think about as their community organizations for engagement, formal and informal. But it's just a suggestion as we're looking at principles for consideration.
Yes, please.
This is just specific to the term acceptable, and this may have been discussed among the group, and thank you for accepting my lateness to our meeting today. Just to maybe clarify, and I think this connects to some of what both Courtney and Jordan were saying, that accessible can mean the way in which the engagement is presented or how the tool is presented so that a very wide audience of people can participate or feel as though that information is for them. But I think accessibility also, when sort of commonly used and not necessarily related to specific laws or legislation, has to do with the ease of access and the ease of accessing language and communications. And when I think about that term accessible near to grassroots and thinking about the complexity of transit work, a lot of that has to do with the really intensive effort to make sure that complex information and decisions are made, are put in plain language so that people can actually understand and engage and get great feedback about what they see happening. So just, I guess, a comment that accessibility means many different things. It's oftentimes not like well defined in the way that we use it. Like we'll talk about our transit network being accessible. Like, what do we mean by that? Do we mean spatially accessible? Do we mean physically accessible? Do we mean right? So just to maybe add another connection between those two.
Yep, that makes sense to me. So just to make sure I understand that people can not only access as in get to meetings and be part of it, but also that it is presented in a way that is accessible to the average person, that they really can grasp it and respond to it, participate in a way that's simple. Okay. Good.
I have a question regarding what he was talking about, improving the bus stops along the way, get maybe even a sense of pride. Has there been any data about how much the EMX route has improved or ridership has gone up since we put in the new fancier bus stops with the art and all that? Has it made any difference?
I'll have to ask Andrew or Pat or anyone from LTD staff. If not, we can flag that and look into it.
Yes, but
Why? No, I'm sorry. I don't have excuse me, I don't have numbers off the top of my head. What I can tell you is that MX carries a disproportionate number of passengers, right? And part of that is we designed MX routes on places where lots of people riding, but it has gone up at a greater rate than the whole system, right? And up until COVID, since we opened West BGMX, we saw a continued increase over time. And so that ridership is actually still going up. Obviously, things are different because we have overall lower bus ridership, but MX today carries a greater percentage of our passengers than it did pre-COVID. And so it's in some ways working even more important than for us. We can follow up with kind of more specifics, but the answer is yes, we get more ridership. Whether or not it's what is in ridership projections between those projects is different. Much longer.
okay, thanks.
Yes.
So in looking at these guiding principles, it almost feels like we could take them and kind of organize them or word cloud them or make a construct of them that puts together the ones that are closely related, the ones that are more subjective, the ones that are more measurable, the ones that are more objective. Like we could take accessible, respectful, two-way dialogue and group those together. Then we could take data-driven, outcome-oriented, continuous improvement, group those together because they're related and are going to be measured and executed in very different ways.
Could you repeat the first category that you just said?
Like the first set would be two-way dialogue, accessible, respectful. Those kind of all come together in forms of communication that we want to achieve. Whereas data-driven, outcome-oriented, and continuous improvement, those are more kind of measurable. You can look at our communication and say, did we achieve those or not? Right? So it just feels like somehow these need to be categorized in areas that they come together.
Yeah, we can certainly do that. I guess the question I would pose is, do we want to do that now in advance of our discussion about stakeholders, or is that something just that would be useful for the future? Okay, so we want to get into the stakeholders. This is enough to get into the stakeholders. Yeah.
We can come back with some suggestions.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. And then that can be reflected in the framework. Okay. So this is the fun part. So now we're going to talk about, based on these values, who are the individuals, groups, organizations, and partners that have a vested interest in LTD? So that's the first set of stakeholders we want to get out there. And then who are the ones among these that may be harder to reach or potentially overlook, because that was something that we want to make sure we're getting to as well. So I think the way I'd like to do this is really as a brainstorm. Emma's going to be writing down ideas as you come up with them, but and you know, we don't have to come up with a perfect group now. We'll refine this and we'll come back and we'll do this in a more useful, constructive way when we get to the final product. But we want to just get out there and start thinking about, all right, who are these? And it can be individuals, groups, organizations, partners, anything like that. So if you have a thought, please raise your hand and we'll start putting them up on the board. Please, yeah.
That's to get us going as students.
Students, right?
All ages,
And so when you're saying students, you're talking about of all ages?
I think in high school and university in particular.
Okay.
sorry, I didn't hear that.
All high school and university students in particular. Okay. Yes.
I'd like to add younger students too. My son started taking the bus in middle school.
Okay. We got them all. We're all there. Yeah. Employers, businesses, just the business community as a group.
Yeah, for their employees to have transportation to and from work.
Okay. And obviously they have a financial stake as well. Yes.
This is an easy one, ridership. We should be talking to them, the people who are
Customers, yeah.
Customers. And this is on my involvement. I would add BEST, Better Union Springfield Transportation, or the focus is transit, and neighborhood organizations for their breadth, not necessarily their depth.
Can you speak more about what you mean by neighborhood organizations? Are
The
those?
city of Eugene is organized into 23 different neighborhood organizations, and theoretically have meetings, et cetera, where we reach people. They do tend to be older, white, and homeowners, but nonetheless,
Do they make specific recommendations to the city council?
they can.
But they don't have specific legislative power. It's more just a recommendation.
They are authorized by the city, and in a couple of cases, the county, to be a conduit of information.
Okay. Thanks, Courtney.
Yeah.
All right. We'll come back to you. We'll come back to you, yeah.
It's a little bit hard because, the truth is that everybody in Lane County has a stake in having LTD be successful. But, I just wanted to, those who can't drive have more of a stake.
Okay. Those who can't drive, yeah. So that you want to just talk a little about what that includes? So obviously it includes people who are not of driving age.
Yes,
Right.
it includes people too young to drive, it includes people with disabilities, includes people who can't afford a car. What else does it include? Includes people who have been in trouble with the law and can't have a car for some reason associated with that. A lot more people who you go from the people who can't drive to the people who probably shouldn't drive, and that's probably another big segment of the population.
And getting bigger all the time.
Yeah. I know a few of those people, yeah. Yes,
I would say minority groups and immigrants, like there is a an increase in people who want to speak Spanish on the bus.
so talk about a little bit what you mean by minority groups.
So like ethnic minorities, but also people that like they say people with disabilities. And one of the other ones that I was thinking about is I mean I'll bring it up for the next one, but yeah, just minorities, whether they don't ride as much or like I said, ethnic minorities.
Healthcare, and I'm thinking particularly emergency departments and urgent care. They have a friendly faces program, and there are others though that if you're not feeling well, if you can drive, you can't drive. So there's transportation to healthcare is significant.
To healthcare destinations.
There you go.
So, okay, so healthcare.
So healthcare organizations, I guess, right? Is that what we're talking
No,
about?
the users of healthcare, like the users of healthcare
Well, I'm
destinations?
thinking both, because frequently the case manager is looking for barriers in health, in transportation is part of that.
Okay. Good. Yes.
Two different groups. One is organized groups like this, but also like Lila. I think we should access our Lila.
So tell us what that is.
Lila.
Yeah.
Living independent, lane independent living alliance.
Okay.
I just call it Lila, but anyway,
Sorry, out of towners.
okay, sorry. Our, different organizations like that, and I'm thinking more in terms of people with disability or alter able, but any kind of organization that's is a stakeholder in people using the bus. The other is people who choose to ride the bus. There's people that maybe have access to a car or bike, but they're choosing to ride the bus. So that's another population.
So as a subset of customers, there's the customers who are intentionally choosing, and you think so that's a specific group, okay?
I think you can break down commuters down into those based on frequency. We looked at that in the survey data, that those daily riders or those commuters in specifics, or those who do it just for work or school, right? There's those differences, whereas if you need to take the bus in order to go to Winco and then go to the pharmacy, and that's like a whole day trip, that's a different experience, and that's a different stakeholder who relies on LTD a lot more than saving $5 on their parking pass at work.
Yeah, I mean, the concept of who's choosing and who's not choosing is not black and white. Right? Yeah, are you choosing if you ride the bus because you don't want to pay parking, or maybe you can't afford parking? which who's choosing. Okay,
I would expand the adding to BEST that there are several other organizations that advocate for transportation options.
yeah, that's good to know.
And there's a variety of ways. Some are related to bicycling and safe, accessible bicycle infrastructure facilities like Equitable Mass or the pedestrian advisory committees that engage with City of Eugene or City of Springfield, university-based organizations like Live Move, which is entirely organized around some of these kinds of decisions, and I think of a couple of others. And then I would also add to the note about employers to also be looking at specific employment hubs and where there are concentrations of people who are needing to work or moving to a particular, specific location, one entity, or a very tight geographic area. I think also sort of goes without saying that partners in our other public jurisdictions that are doing long range and near-term planning, that engagement with cities of Eugene, cities of Springfield, Lane County, ELCOG, any variation of governance.
So public sector planning
Public
partners.
sector partners.
Yeah.
And then, sorry, as a third, is to be thinking about how to reach people of different housing tenures. And thinking of John's description that we have some community infrastructure that allows us to reach people who've maybe been in the same house or in the same location for a number of years, but some of our rental advocacy organizations like the Springfield Eugene Tenant Alliance, they could be a great conduit for information about transportation planning and transit access. Also some of our housing developers, both affordable housing, workforce housing, market rate housing. Certainly that's another conduit, and also a piece of thinking about transit oriented development more intensively. So could be helpful.
Can I ask you about the employment hubs? Are there specific organizations that represent any employment hubs we should know about?
And I think both of our hospitals, City of Eugene, University of Oregon, of course, some of our wood products industry, these are large employers within the community. LTC, labor workforce partners. Yeah, but of those, I mean, just looking at it, a very measurable or data-driven perspective and taking things in different lenses, like how do we reach the people we're trying to reach? Where are they currently? And then start thinking with that concentration of people and density of people.
Good, yeah.
The
Go ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead.
Lively discussion. Perfect. Never mind.
Travel Lane County, the hotel association, the tourism, that industry. Create that airport loop to hotels, to Oakland Center, to
This is a pretty broad, three pretty broad ones, but people living in rural, people living in suburban, and people living in urban centers, kind of the three types of sort of residents you can live in this area.
I want to explicitly say like high school for outside students, but schools and the rest of our college and universities here, so Lakeland Community College and Bushnell. I think outside of the students being stakeholders, I think the institutions themselves have a very important need that OTD is a huge part of.
Right.
Yeah, and some of those institutions do have like dedicated departments, like the University of Oregon's Transportation Services, who I know does work very closely with LTD, especially with the MX routes. But thinking about their safe ride programs, so LCC, how that's like a mutually beneficial relationship.
Thinking about them as employment hubs as well as places where students are, and anything else. Those are the main two. Okay. Yeah.
There's an organization called League, and I've been sitting here trying to remember what it stands for, but it's lived experience. Sometimes, I'm very ashamed to say that I can't remember what it is.
What are the letters?
The lived, LEAG.
Oh, like league, like the word league. Okay.
And it's, works with the county, and it is made up of individuals who have lived experience of homelessness.
Okay.
But they are very good at reaching out to their peers.
Go ahead.
So I think the chambers of commerce need to be up there, and probably in a pretty big way. On the employer standpoint, some of the stakeholder engagement with large employers that may need to start occurring is going to be around regulatory environments. And so those groups may not be formally organized in a way that LTD can just go find it. But if you're looking at community of climate friendly and equitable community work and things like that, where we're starting to see sector points around mandated ridership off of our campuses, where infrastructure may or may not be yet to the campuses, that stakeholder engagement will be really important. And it may mean that they're having to generate some data to figure out where those locations are to do engagement.
So is this more, you're talking more about employers that are having to figure out how to be in compliance with new regulations that call for like how they influence their employees getting to and from work? Or can you speak more about?
Looking at your staff over here, and we're like,
No, I was asking. Sure.
yeah, no, yeah, so I think that, there's engagements that's occurring at different state committees and in different legislative sessions around linking large employers to transit.
Okay.
And so that will trickle down into LTD and create probably some pressure on how LTD needs to do stakeholder engagement to be responsive.
I see. So having to work with those groups that are starting to feel the pressure to start, I guess, being in compliance with those emerging regulations and how transit is going to be one of those potential solutions.
Yeah, how do we proactively partner as this stuff is starting to take shape?
Okay, yes.
Yeah, to expand on Courtney's Chamber of Commerce, don't forget Florence and Oak Ridge while you're at it. The other thing I would add.
Are you speaking just of the Florence, like a chamber, or just the actual area?
Well, I think the chamber may be a way to get to Florence.
Okay.
And Oak Ridge. The other place I would suggest is the low-income housing providers, and this is all cornerstones that are.
So say that low-income housing providers.
Such as St. Vincent de Paul, Cornerstone, etc. Shelter care, yeah.
Sounds pretty good.
Yeah. In addition to the low income housing providers, I think, some outreach to large property managers is probably good, although, it might be a harder sell to get them to really engage.
Don't worry about running out of room. We'll find more room.
I was also going to add, and thinking a little bit upstream at the building culture. So the local American Institute of Architects, the local Society of Landscape Architects, the chapter of the American Planning Association. These are all of the design professionals and licensed professionals who are tasked with connecting point A and whatever is happening on site at point B, and for them to be engaged in these conversations and also well educated about opportunities or changing context. Really, really important, because those are the voices who are trusted as professionals to advise their clients on how to take advantage of these connections and opportunities. And I don't think I've ever seen in 20 years a presentation to the local design community about
that was educational as opposed to an immediate decision.
Interesting.
Like establish a better relationship and kind of tapping into the expertise on both
Civil
ends.
engineers, but also of course being the collection professionals are designing sidewalks and that piece of the public ground.
Interesting. Okay. Yes.
Home builders association.
Home builders.
Is that different than developers or?
No, this is the people who build houses.
The construction.
Different.
Construction. They might also know where more stuff is coming.
You have to be told to do this job. I don't know that.
I think the law enforcement community is, or not law enforcement community, the law enforcement process, like in Eugene and Springfield in particular, they do have an interest in how LTD operates, either through like traffic or security or safety. Thinking about like the rough bus stops throughout LTD and how there's frequent like jaywalking or no sidewalks or no bus seats or no shelters, things like that, that does impact like the safety aspect and probably something that law enforcement would consider.
I would add, like childcare organizations. I think they're
Childcare organizations or childcare
providers.
users?
Yeah.
You already have major employers up there, but concentrating on especially the downtown employers that pay for parking for their employees and the various parking garages, it's damn expensive. And it would be cheaper to give them an LTD pass, and I think some of us do, but that might be an avenue to explore.
So the impact is down to the actual people providing the parking or?
Well,
Employers that rely.
Yeah.
see, I've got 50 employees.
Yeah.
And I pay for parking for 25 of them.
Right.
It's part of their package.
So part of when we're talking to employers is about the parking issue.
Right. And give them an opportunity and try to encourage their people to take the alternate route instead of driving their car, parking and walking in the rain. Why not take the bus and walk in the rain?
We have a parking cash out law here in Oregon. Maybe that's a California thing. Okay.
There are some ongoing transportation demand management conversations that would direct city to that point that Robert was saying.
And that also gets into some of the regulatory, I think, stakes that maybe Courtney was referring to, right?
I also wanted to add, building on the point about childcare centers, community centers, like the Y or Boys and Girls Club or any of our large recreational facilities, different pools that people go to at all hours of the day, lots of after school access and lots of people having to drive young people all over town. That would be great. And the middle school learning things that I would love to go to after school, but then I can't bike to school because I can't take my bike on the bus. I don't know if I can do that myself.
To add to that one that might not be obvious to the River Road Park District, there's nothing.
River Road Park District?
Right. They're also, they're like a community center, but they're not embedded in the city game.
Like that, and maybe LTD's driver staff as part of the stakeholders, it's their
Operators?
operators. And then to add kind of some subgroups within the minority groups, tribes. Folks that work with at-risk youth that are either homeless, like 15th Night, or Looking Glass.
Good looking.
Called Looking Glass.
And then you said at-risk night? Or
It's called 15th Night.
sorry.
They're a homeless youth.
Night, like the nighttime or?
15th Night.
Like,
Oh, yeah, yes, nighttime.
Yes, nighttime, thank you. Yes, nighttime.
Okay.
Yes, nighttime. They,
Yeah,
they,
and so like that.
So as we look at these groups, I'm just wondering whether people see specific groups that are more challenging to reach than others. Like when you look at all these, which are the ones that often get overlooked or might be more challenging to reach? Not to assign blame necessarily, but those two things are, go together. Yeah.
So, sorry, so groups that are harder to reach, I think of people that don't ride the bus, have a car, and I don't know. So I think it's really important to engage those people that have never ridden the bus, have no plans of riding the bus, have, many ways of getting to and from work, but our LTD's projects still affect their lives. So I don't know how to specifically pinpoint that group, but
well, it goes to the value we were talking about earlier of people who may not necessarily be supporters, right? But need to be involved in the discussion.
Right. What about people that, well, a good example was Baxter or any of the large mills, because they're always on shift. There's a time when they all get out. And I can guarantee you there's very few of them that take the bus, because either there's not a route close enough, or it's inconvenient for them, or the timing is off, or they don't want to be a bus rider, right? But that's an opportunity that we could approach, because it would be so much cheaper for them and so much more convenient to park and ride than to have to park in the mud in the parking lot and traipse your way in. I having worked in a mill as a kid, but yeah, I think that might be someone who at least focus on a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm hearing a couple of themes here, right? Well, one is, who are the stakeholders that we can reach out to because they might be potential customers if we really listen to them and provided them with the services they want, right? That's one group that I'm hearing a lot about. Another is, who do we need to be in touch with so that they're involved, so that they don't come up at the last second and say, hey, wait a minute, we ate all this and we haven't heard from you. That's another group of people, right? And then there's, I don't know if you agree with this, but I think there might be a third group, which are the people whose voice just often gets lost, right? And we don't hear from them. And if we did, we might come up with different ideas, right? And that's, so all three of those I'm hearing kind of in here. The third group is the one that I'm most interested in, because that's going to take the most work in terms of putting the framework together. We have to think about how we're going to accomplish that, because those are the hardest thing. Yes, of course we want to find new customers, and of course we want to engage the people who are going to be potential challenges, but in some ways that's easier, right? The hardest is, who are the people whose voice never gets heard, and what are the strategies we're going to use to get them? And,
I think kind of sort of going off that point, a lot of what's been put on here is kind of from an employer perspective, and that could be a good way to get to the employees, but you got to make sure you get to the employees instead of just taking the word of the employer and just being like, oh yeah, this is what they said, but you got to make sure it's actually speaking to the employees, workers.
how about like labor unions?
like a good stakeholder, and then
It's kind of note when we're adding new stakeholders, I don't think we have our school districts up there, and Bethel school districts, not necessarily just the students, but the actual entities and all of their staff and administrators, teachers.
Oh, we had that somewhere, but maybe not.
Well, we said students.
We'll make sure.
They're in there. I think also building on Jordan's point that thinking about that strategy, LTD being a large entity, engaging as a peer with some of these large entities, employers, that that could be a way also to create the space for engagement, because if you offer someone the opportunity to engage, but tell them they don't have any time to do it, and don't support the creation of that space, but you're trying to do that through an employer, I can see how that might not be successful.
Yeah.
And think
And
of different strategies to actually.
And that is our next topic. We're getting to that as soon as we're done with stakeholders, so, yeah.
When I look at the cloud, and I was thinking about the surveys, the people that aren't gonna be reached to are those who are not hooked in to the community. And when I say that they may not be hooked in digitally, virtually, they may not have access to regular communication, they're transient, move around fast. But it can be elderly, it could be youth, it can be individuals who are unhoused or vulnerable in some sort of way, but don't have that, they're not hooked in all the ways that were the top ones.
Immigrants, getting mentioned earlier, yeah.
People with a different language, yes, exactly.
Also, to add a little bit onto that, people that may not know how to read or write, so just really whether we give it to them in Spanish or English.
Right.
That's, like my grandparents, they don't speak English. They only speak Spanish, but they don't know how to read or write in either one. So, their opinion is completely missing.
Yeah.
Sort of on that same line, I think we have to be careful when we're trying to get people's input of not assuming that everyone has a phone. Definitely that everyone doesn't have a smartphone. Everyone doesn't have a computer. I mean, so there has to be other means of communicating with people.
You guys definitely want to get into strategies and tactics. I'm feeling it. I'm feeling you want to get into that. So
but, yeah, I wanted to make one point. It's just that this is a really great list of kind of the full, and there's potentially a lot of groups missing here, but it's such a full list. And so I think just keeping that in mind for the next activity, but also kind of recognizing that this takes a lot of work, right? And so wanting to kind of understand that LTD staff, are a limited group. And so when we look at this list, we're like, can be very overwhelming, right? In terms of how to make sure that everyone knows what's going on, stays up to date, understands the process, understands why decisions were made. Like, this is a really big task. And so I think right now we kind of just put everything onto the board. And so now we're going to be like diving into the how of it. And then next week, getting more into the trade-offs and to actually applying like a real life scenario to it. But so really just appreciate the kind of putting everything out there. And I know it looks really messy, but we're going to come back with a little bit more organized.
I'm not sure if we explicitly mentioned the cities within the LTD service area, but obviously like Eugene and Springfield have people whose job it is to pay attention and have time carved out for this, but the smaller cities, like some of them don't have the same level of resources.
Yeah, some of them were mentioned, but I'm not sure all of them were.
Yeah, but just like, the cities in general, as city governments, I guess I would say.
How about somewhere?
We have public sector partners right there, but,
Okay.
but we can make sure that. Okay, so yes, I think Emma makes a really important point, which is part of developing strategies and tactics is understanding that probably not going to perfectly reach every one of these people, but that we want to develop strategies and tactics efficiently, most effectively, with the resources we have, reach as many of these people as possible, and in particular to prioritize the ones that are harder to reach, because we want to make sure their voice is heard. So the next exercise is getting into that, and for this, we're going to ask you to break into groups again. We're not going to assign them anything, so you can just huddle with your neighbors. But the group should be 3 to 4 people, and like last time, please do assign a note taker. We're going to give you 30 minutes, and you can come up with the strategies and tactics that you see as most useful. So the prompts we're using here are: what are strategies that LTD should use to foster meaningful public engagement, so specific strategies, and then what tactics help support or operationalize these strategies. Now, there's a difference between strategies and tactics, and I want to just be clear about that because it can get confusing when you're thinking about these things. So this is just for the purposes of this exercise, we're defining a strategy as a high-level overarching approach, right? So something big, we should be trying to reach these specific groups by thinking about how we can get into the community and talk to them more about it. That's a high-level large approach. A tactic are these specific actions you take to operationalize the strategy. So the examples we have here: ensure the public is systematic, the feedback is systematically collected, analyzed, and integrated into the decision-making process. That's the strategy. How do you do that? You might develop tactics such as an internal agency process for responding to and addressing the concerns, publicly sharing how the input was considered. So that's how we're defining that distinction, right? You don't have to be perfect about it, but we think it'll be helpful because when we come up with the community engagement framework, we're going to want to say, okay, here are the strategies that we're going to be using in overall, and then therefore these tactics we're going to employ to put those strategies into action. And making that distinction we found is really important because it helps you understand what are we actually going to do. Right, that's always, when you come up with these plans, people make plans all the time, or they're making plans. Okay, but what does it mean? And just getting into tactics forces you to say, well, okay, that means we're going to do X, Y, and Z. So if that's, unless there are any questions about that, anyone have any questions before we break out?
I just want to emphasize that having the notes is really critical because we were going to rely on the whiteboard, but it's going to take some time to get everything on here onto paper, and so we're really going to be relying on your notes.
Yeah, please do take good notes. We will report out, and we'll be sure to share everything with the group in 30 minutes. But we definitely want you to take good notes on this so that we can look at those afterwards as well. All right. Thank you so much, and please proceed. I'm good.
I'll take you where you need to go.
You guys are ready.
And I was like, I almost.
Yeah, you guys are having a lot of fun over there, but I don't know if there's.
Is that's what
Daniel, you're good. You guys good? You ready? Ready to go? Yeah. George, your group looking good? You guys ready to go? Yeah. I know you guys are having a lot of fun, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. All right. So let's get to let's hear what you guys came up with. And again, I hope you're taking good notes. We will be listening and taking it down, but we just want to make sure we have the notes so we can digest it and bring it back to you next week in a useful form. So Daniel, your group, you want to start over there?
Yeah.
Report out? Yeah.
Okay. Because no one else can read it. So.
I already had to do that last time, so.
Okay. So we came up with several strategies. Do you want me to hit all of them or just a couple? Okay. Proactive, before there's an issue that LTD wants to put out, but a proactive plan to prepare neighborhood groups for future engagement. And so the tactics that would go into that would be, now I gotta read it. Identifying staff that can create consistent relationships with those groups by showing up to their regular meetings, whatever those might be, so that there's a relationship created ahead of time. Identify those groups to which to target, and attend those regular meetings. Then the next strategy was create a geographically assigned contact grid so that when someone is needing to, so that's LTD, the first one was LTD coming and reaching out. This one would be if people in the community want to reach LTD, so that there is some kind of way to geographically assign different people so that there's quick grab George is my guy, John is my guy, Ringo's my guy, and can reach to that. So the tactics would be to create some kind of graphics or information structure and put it in different places so people can get to it and learn who their person is. And of course, assign staff to do that. Sorry, Beth. Let's see. This one would be tactics, but it was a strategy that we started that didn't quite flesh out, and that's the app that exists. Expand the app so that it has, and this is of course directed at our current riders who use the app, so that there is regular information, so that you're creating a culture on the app for people to engage, that when there is something to push out, it's expected and regular.
So the strategy is engaging riders, right? In a kind of variety.
The tactic is the app and to do the technical work to get that. And the trick is to have that consistent. You can't just put it in there and then use it when you want to. It's got to be, you got to educate the riders to use it. Oh goodness gracious. This one kind of went a far field of the strategy, but bear with me. Marketing education campaign that's really directed at non-riders about the benefits of the community, not necessarily recruiting riders, but the benefits of ridership, so that it's consistent, it's in the head, you're hearing it, so that when there's engagement, people are, oh yes, I want to engage. That could be through open forums or multiple different tactics to get that education out there. Take a forum, pick a way. Consistent, regular outreach, not just when this issue, and there's a theme here, so it doesn't go into the black hole of I didn't see it, because nobody looks for something if you don't know it's coming. But if you know that it's every Friday, it's on KLCC, or that's the NPR station here. It's got to be digital radio. We really like radio because it gets people that are in the cars, Eugene Weekly, etc., etc. But if it's always on the fourth Thursday that this is happening at 5, so that people are regularly hearing it, and then they say there's a engagement opportunity about some specific issue, people are actually seeing it because it's used to seeing it. And finally, door knocking campaigns. Ooh, yeah. In a neighborhood and business, this is very targeted about whatever issue, and recruiting volunteers to be door knockers that are best time we do to engage, inform, and have those conversations that are really targeted. That's it.
Wow, great work. Group 1, or whatever your number is, group 2. You're 1, sorry. Great work. That is really fantastic. Thank you for all that. I'm so curious now whether other groups came up with completely different things or similar things, but yeah.
Oh yeah.
Totally. Okay. All right.
The first one was kind of what your first bullet point is, or strategy is, that prior engagement. Instead of telling community about the projects, have a reciprocated, proactive outreach strategy, proactive communication and outreach. Yeah. We talked about a strategy of promoting Visit Lane County, explore the regions, folks who in the internal community, like for folks that are in Eugene, explore Walterville or explore Crestwell or Cottage Row. And then also the external communities, using some of the Traveling County data that where the markets that are coming into Eugene, and putting that in their communities as far as visit and explore our region. Messaging directly to the people that you want to reach, so really targeted marketing in those communities.
Using the window photographs to target specific groups, like the guys coming from the mill carrying their lunchbox, the family, the person in the wheelchair. Those beautiful windows, we've used them at Traveling County many times, and they work beautiful.
Another strategy is using partner organizations like the Springfield Union Chamber or Florence Chambers, the LCC, Willamette Lane, just to name a couple, but to build trust and relationships within their customer base, their membership organization. So leveraging those partnerships to reach communities through their existing relationships to build trust, gauge feedback, and collect insights from these organizations about maybe the messaging isn't coming from LTD to those populations, but it's a partnership with LTD Willamette Lane to reach their membership. It's the chamber, it's the business organization, or the employees that are members of the chamber. Focus resources and leverage partnerships with these groups. Next strategy, encourage ridership through sustainable commuting. So targeted marketing, again, kind of with some of the customized language, culture, removing barriers to entry, and incentivize ridership like parking rides, and encourage multimodal commuting, whether it's bike, bus, and scooter. But really that incentivized piece of that to encourage folks to ride the bus, whether it's, we talked about like a raffle, the more you ride, the more entries you got, and then however much you saved in parking, that could all be pooled together by businesses or LPD to do a monthly giveaway for folks that ride the bus. This kind of creative one.
You guys should be on the innovation team.
Available. Another strategy, create and improve safe, accessible, well-designed bus stops. We liked what you were saying earlier about, we kind of took that and made a strategy. Some of the tactics would be, you know, involving the community in that neighborhood, sort of really target, market, and collaborate with the artists or folks of that residential community to foster a sense of pride. And making a personal invitation, not just kind of a blanketed invitation, but really that personalized invitation to bring folks in to be part of that process. Of course, there's a funding piece that we didn't really get to, but that was some of the tactics we talked about. And then we went on, our last one is fostering, the strategy is to foster a service-oriented culture. And I know LTD probably has a robust customer service training program, but really tapping into the hospitality side of the riders. So viewing riders that are guests on the bus. We talked about employing public safety officers who are riding the bus who have a hospitality focus. Promoting a warm and welcoming experience to build repeat guests. Kind of take that from the hotel side of things. Upholding a standard of excellence and learning what is important, what are the priorities of riders to build a sense of mutual respect and again, that hospitality culture. And then we talked about some sort of we know LTD does a recognition program for their staff. They have like an employee or driver of the month, but focusing that on the feedback from the riders or the customer's experience and letting those riders have a voice in recognizing the staff for, you know, friendliness or their overall experience. But incentivize rewards and experiences for staff and drivers on that as well. And then a welcome amenity. We thought that could be also another way of creating that hospitality service culture. Maybe it's not every day, but on occasion, drivers could be equipped with hand sanitizers or mints or something that is just a nice little welcome. Thanks for choosing. Yeah, goes in that service.
Wow, you guys are very creative. So it's interesting. It sounds like you kind of have taken the approach on a lot of these of, you know, increasing the customer base and treating the customers in a warmer, better way is a way to improve engagement. Like that you're kind of seeing those as one and the same, right? That's really interesting. Yeah. All right, cool. Thank you so much. Group 3. Sorry, I was telling you a number. I don't.
That's okay. Jordan and Karen and Susan and that, and I love the ideas that come when you talk to people in the hospitality industry about transit. The transit service. That was beautiful. And what you said about sustainable commuting made me think of how hard it is to get people to commit to be vegetarian, how easy it is to get people to say we will eat one night less of red meat in our family, and hugely influential. We bucketed most of our conversation around, as others, engagement, and then thinking more about how advocacy can be a part of fostering meaningful public participation. So one of the first very early systemic observations is that when LTD is reaching out, it's really important that LTD understand the communications infrastructure that exists within the organization that's reaching out to. So if we send one email to David and it goes to 812 people, and we know that that's consistent or reliable communication that people actually read, versus we send something to an organization that has 1,000 people on an email list, but we don't know when or if that message actually got out, or maybe there isn't an email list. So just that awareness of the communications infrastructure that partner organizations have. We talked a lot about the importance of proactive and continual engagement and early engagement on projects to learn about the community's priorities. We also talked about that early upstream engagement as being an opportunity to convey the need and the reason that is behind what's happening and what's proposed with the transit service, and that context and articulating the specific need or the specific problem or challenge that a project is trying to meet for the community is really important and isn't always the focus of the conversation. We're usually pretty far downstream in the details. We also talked about accessible and attendable meetings, timing meetings so that people can attend them, and the need to go to places where the riders, the neighbors, the people, the employees in these various different stakeholder groups are located. So to both and when thinking about engagement points. And then we talked a lot about advocacy and the importance of LTD's clear advocacy for improved transit, for an improved transit system and district, and that's the purpose behind LTD existing as an entity. So that being more overt in conversation being important, because it would be disingenuous to not have a bias towards the improvement of the transit system when talking about transit improvements. And people feel that right away. We talked about looking for opportunities for LTD to be a clear self-advocate and also a relevant advocate for other important community efforts or projects or needs. And so thinking about the way in which LTD fosters trust in the community by its engagement with relevant projects. So if there's a visible opportunity for community leadership or a way in which LTD can talk about how a project happening in the community that it might not be directly a part of or a partner to, but it can speak to how these pedestrian improvements are really important to this transit service being effective, or this safety improvement is really important to the people that we're trying to serve with this bus system, or any number of examples, that be a place for LTD to be more visible and clear about its mission in the community. And then to empower community leaders and individuals to advocate for this work. And we talked about that being a really clear expression of the background work and education that nurtures project support, and that in many cases, different individuals or different advocacy groups or stakeholder groups could be a more effective voice for LTD than LTD itself, because it demonstrates that people understand and are actually willing to step up and advocate themselves, or that their group stands with a proposal and is willing to help others to feel better engaged and informed about that. And then lastly, which relates to both, that LTD continue to participate in community challenges and education and outreach, and make sure that there are fun and time limited opportunities for engagement that might help people to become more regular in their experience before they are return customers or happy satisfied customers, that they have some easy entry.
Awesome. All right. That's great. So really interesting how 3 different groups came up with really 3 different types of approaches to this problem, which is really useful. And I think what we'll do is we'll take these and try to collapse them into something that we can share with you next time.
Just hit the next. Two more. Howard?
Okay.
Next one. Next one. Yeah.
Yeah, so we talked about the next meeting being on the 8th. We will talk to the chair and vice chair and advance that again and come up with the agenda. I'm hoping that we'll be able to start soon sharing drafts of what will eventually be part of the document, right? That's where we're trying to get to so that you can have something to react to with respect to that. But again, we did agree earlier that we're moving meeting 6 to the 12th. So please make sure that you're aware of that. I know we sent out a calendar invitation, but just want to make sure that's happening. And also don't forget to submit the W4 form and the W4 form. You haven't already done that. And is there anything else?
We didn't move this. There was no December 6th. So just ignore that. But the 6th and last meeting is on Tuesday, December 12th. I'm going to come around and collect the notes, but I think I did a good job of capturing everything. And then if you do have a filled out vendor registration form and W4, you can give that to me, W9. Oh, and then you'll have, I guess, until the last meeting to submit that, but if the earlier the better. So if folks want to, do you have the
Thank you all again for being here. I know it's late on a Wednesday night, and I know we all have day jobs, so really appreciate it.
There's a lot of food still in
yeah.
the back that you guys can take to go. There's like burritos that are packaged that you could take.
Thank you.
The other thing I want to mention is we're covering the same topic at our next meeting, so stay on it, chew on it, and bring things back.
All right, thank you so much.